Hi everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Maria Forrest. I work for KPMG China. I used to live and work in Hong Kong and China, and I used to run the national graduate program across China for KPMG. And I've since returned to the UK, and what I do now is I look after overseas returnees like yourselves from China or Hong Kong who are looking to go home after graduation. This particular talk was originally kind of more aimed at the Hong Kong nationals, only because we can't get visas between the two locations, and we're getting quite full up across mainland China. But of course, if you are mainland Chinese, you can still apply. The program is still open for the autumn batch. So in this talk, obviously, as I said, it started as a Hong Kong talk, but I'll happily address both of you. We're one firm, just rather complicated that we can't get the visas between the two locations currently. So today's session is going to be recorded, and it's a fantastic kit that you've got here at the University of Manchester. And what you'll even be able to do is catch up with it on the University of Manchester Careers YouTube channel after. So if you've got buddies that are in lectures that you know haven't been able to dial in today, or if you miss anything, or if I speak too quickly, which I will try not to do, then please do catch up with it on there. So let's just flick through the slides. So what I'll do today is I'll talk to you about KPMG and the different services that kind of we offer, that we recruit into. I'll talk to you about how to apply, give you plenty of tips on the actual application process and kind of things to look out for, how to be competitive as an overseas student. And then obviously there'll be some information about the various different programs that we've got at the moment that you can apply for. Now, at the end, I've put questions, but actually what I'm going to do is on the final slide, I'm going to show you guys my email address. So I won't take questions on a live feed. I'll allow you to drop me emails as and when at the end of the session. There's also a couple of flyers, which I'll ask Noeleen, your lovely careers manager, to hand out to you guys or flick out to you on email after the session. So let's talk a little bit about KPMG then. I think probably most of you who are dialed in are pretty familiar with KPMG and what we do. But this is just obviously a little overview for you. KPMG International, 207,000 people worldwide and 10,000 partners, lots of different countries and territories. And the reason I put this slide up really is not to brag about how big KPMG is. It's more for students like you who are currently studying overseas and from China. I'm sure would be keen to travel and see the world and work across the world later in life. So important for you then that you go for a company or a firm which is going to offer you those possibilities. So more importantly then, let's get down to business for KPMG China. So KPMG China, we started in 1945 in Hong Kong. The reason why we set up in Hong Kong actually was because HSBC was a big client of ours in London, and they wanted us to be their auditor in Hong Kong. They wanted to set up in Hong Kong. So that's why we originally set up in Hong Kong, and that was in 1945. And obviously then we had to wait for China to open up and get licenses. And then we set ourselves up in China properly in 1983. First big four to have data analytics and insight center as well. We tended to grow by setting up in a small office with a partner and another member of staff, as opposed to buying out a local firm and rebranding it. So subsequently, we're not the biggest of the big four because we haven't grown in headcount as quickly as our competitors who have tended to buy out local firms. But we like to think that that keeps us consistent in terms of culture and who we are. And in that, we've tried to pioneer ourselves in terms of technology. And I'd say we're pretty much the front runner when it comes to data and analytics and technology, because that's what we've tried to put our unique selling point, if you like, across the China firm. So when I started at KPMG, I can't even begin to tell you how many years ago, we only had 10 offices in China and about half the amount of staff, maybe about 9,000 staff. And now we've got 21 offices and 12,000 partners and staff. So some lovely offices. And if you're from one of the areas that you see, one of the smaller cities, beautiful places to start working. It's a beautiful country. So not always necessarily to apply for one of the bigger cities. I think some of the smaller cities are lovely, lovely offices, lovely culture. So don't rule that out, especially if that's where you're from. So We recruit around 1,500 graduates per year. We recruit them into our audit, tax and advisory functions, advisory being our consultancy arm. So we take around 50% into our audit function, and the remaining 50% is split quite evenly between tax and advisory. Most cities have all areas of these. We take around 1/3 of our overall graduate intake from overseas universities like Manchester. Manchester's in our top 10 in terms of number of recruits every year returning back to China or Hong Kong. So a good chunk of our graduate intake every year comes from overseas. I tend to say, if you're a little bit unsure which area you want to go into, you know you want to work in professional services, you know you want training, you know you want kind of a supportive culture in the first 2 to 3 years, but you're a little bit unsure, I tend to say apply for audit. Audit is a wonderful place to start your career. It gives you a really good overview of how a business works, how it stays healthy, how it minimises risk. So really, really good overview of how to run a business, unlike the other two areas, which obviously tend to go a little bit more focused straight away. So when I worked in London before I moved overseas to Hong Kong and China, I worked for a bank and I used to do special projects for the CEO of Barclays Investment Bank. And actually part of my job in working for him was to sit in on the board meetings and take minutes. And I would say around 80% of that board of directors, the CEO, the CFO, the technology director, the marketing director, the director in charge of servicing, had all become audit partners in a big four firm before they joined Barclays. So just such a great place to start your career in terms of springboards into other areas of life, business, other businesses. You work in audit, for example, you tend to specialize in a client base like those directors I've just mentioned would have specialized in financial clients. Let's say you're a hospitality, you could go on to become CEO of the Marriott Group, for example. So you do become quite specialist in an industry, which gives you a springboard really for the future. Of course, I would also encourage you to stay at KPMG and become equity partners, but I know that's not the case for everybody and it's not everybody's long-term plan. So tax then, tax is a lovely area for overseas students. It's also a lovely area if you're a little bit unsure what you want to do, because tax is the only area of our business where our graduate program rotates around 2 or 3 or 4 areas of tax. So what will happen is you'll start and you'll spend some time in corporate tax, some time in M&A, some time in transfer pricing. So you will get a taste of each area of tax before you actually have to specialise. It's called the Broader Perspective Programme, and you can find all the details of it on our website. Definitely something worth doing. So tax, very international, lots of cross-border work, a lot of international staff and partners working in tax too. Advisory, this is obviously our consultancy arm, which I know a lot of you are interested in. This is the arm where we're obviously competing with other big four, but also against the Accentures and the Boston Consulting Groups of the world. So lots of different areas within advisory to specialise in. We tend to ask you to apply for audit, tax or advisory initially. Then as you go through the selection process, we tend to funnel you into a certain area. You might be interested in deal advisory or strategy, and that tends to come later in the actual selection process, where we would then say, right, you'll be interviewed by a strategy partner, for example. So you don't have to specify straight away which area of advisory, but you can certainly show some interest in that throughout your selection process. So here's some clients then. As I mentioned to you, I mean, obviously it's just a list, it's not overly inspiring, but just really want to give you an idea that we take any degree discipline at KPMG. So whatever your interest or your background, engineering, sciences, whatever it might be, we tend to have clients in those sectors, especially tech as well. So people that may be really interested in technology and have studied computer science or something, but aren't necessarily interested in going to the real technical side. They could work with clients. So just to give you an idea really how global our client base is, we're often working cross-border with other KPMG member firms, particularly the UK, on various different projects. So even going back home to China or Hong Kong, you still get a fair bit of contact with UK counterparts if that's something that you're interested in. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about you guys then. So when you're returning back home to Hong Kong and China, just some things to consider. Okay, first thing is professional exams. To go into audit within mainland China, you do need to do the CICPA, and in Hong Kong, the HKICPA. In tax, you also tend to do a CPA qualification, and advisory really does vary. Now, we'll obviously register you for those exams and make sure you're ready to take them, because we take any degree discipline. We do have a conversion program for anybody who's a non-accounting major. So you tend to just kind of be studying a little bit longer if you come from a non-accounting background. So don't panic about doing a CFA or an ACCA or anything before you carry yourself back home, because we'll kind of sort all that out for you and talk to you about what's relevant in the area that you're working in. A lot of people do say to me, do you work long hours at KPMG? And most certainly we do. It is a job for people that want to work hard and play hard. In the peak season in audit, we do have long hours. However, I would say that worth considering, and a great time to return home to China or Hong Kong as a result, is that more and more companies now in that region in particular are really trying to sell themselves as becoming an employer of choice, sell themselves to you so that you want to work there. So what you'll tend to find is, years ago, it was quite difficult culturally in China and Hong Kong to, you'd have to be at your desk while the boss was still there, and you kind of had to do those hours whether you liked it or not, even whether you had anything to do or not. But very, very different now, and quite common in the summer for people to leave early, go and have dinner with their family. We have lots of different kind of things to choose from on what we call our My Life program to help you achieve work-life balance, from gym membership and restaurant and cinema tokens to obviously support for working parents, that kind of thing. So as I say, you'll find that loads of companies in that region now are really pushing that employer of choice agenda. So amazing for you guys to be going back now with a bit less pressure than maybe you would have had 15 years ago. So global mobility then, I've showed you the KPMG global map, so you know all the places we are in the world. We tend to say you need to work for 2 or 3 years and get your professional qualification before you qualify for our GO program, which is our global mobility program. And that's KPMG worldwide, really. The reason for that is because once you've left a country as a graduate, you would need to be sponsored to go back in years later. And that visa sponsorship is much, much easier if you've got the professional qualification and some relevant experience, whereas after 1 year, it would be almost impossible to obtain that visa. So that tends to be why we use that as a guideline in terms of entering the global mobility program. Now, this could be anything from a 6-month project to a permanent transfer to a 2-year secondment to a 3-month kind of get to know the business in a different country. So lots of different options there, and ever growing as the world becomes smaller and smaller thanks to technology. Lots of chances to go around the world with KPMG. So visas is a big issue then. So let's talk first about you guys. So between mainland China and Hong Kong, you still need visas between the two locations. So to work in China, you do need to hold a Chinese passport. And for Hong Kong, you do need permanent Hong Kong ID or right of abode. So that is the situation. There's loads of movement, particularly in audit later on between mainland China and Hong Kong. But initially, you do need to apply where you're from. You guys can also stay in the UK now, I know. And I know that the time that you can get that visa sponsorship has increased from 3 months to 2 years. I don't know loads of detail about that, as I do work directly for the China firm, but I can tell you that you can apply for the UK and for China at the same time. It's absolutely no problem at all. The systems aren't linked, and that you can get sponsored to stay in the UK, but that you would need to speak to our KPMG UK team in more detail about that, because it's changing all the time, especially with the current politics here in the UK. So always worth speaking to our amazing visa people about your right of abode and how it would work for you. So advantages and disadvantages of overseas studies then. When I go back to the China firm, once or twice a year to meet with all the team and to talk about overseas students, I always speak to the partners and staff about returning overseas students. What are they good at? What are they weaker at? What could we improve on? And one of the things that has become more and more worrying for me in the last couple of years is the level of English of returning students is not as good as it was, say, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So I must say to you guys, you've got to get yourself out there practicing that English, whether it's volunteer work or doing something, you know, joining a society that isn't necessarily the Hong Kong society or the China society, just getting those English skills going so that when you go back home, you can say that English is one of your strengths. That's one of your competitive advantages, really important, okay? And as I've said, you can apply for both the UK and for the China firm at the same time. That's no problem at all. There's no clash. We work really closely together. We know we're sometimes fishing in the same pond, but that's life. So please feel free to do that if you're interested in staying in the UK too. I know they still have openings on their Audit Mandarin program at the moment as well. So recruitment timelines then, I'll talk in a bit more detail. I've got a special slide for this. But we do run our autumn recruitment as we are now, the traditional graduate recruitment, where you'd need to apply now and then go through the selection process, ideally back home in China or Hong Kong, maybe in the Christmas holidays, or we can work it out so that you can come to meet me in the London office for some of the assessment, and you can go back, you can Skype with maybe a manager and an audit partner, if it was audit, for example, that you're applying for. So we can work it out. I still think it's better for you guys to go back and see the offices, see if it's somewhere you'd like to work. But if you can't, then we can certainly work that out for you here. So what will happen is then you will apply online. All the details can be found on our website, the link's on there. And then you will fill out an online application form. And then you will go through our online assessment tests. At the moment this year, in the China firm, we are doing online aptitude tests, still quite traditional aptitude tests. KPMG in the UK is a more gamified assessment. You'll tend to find a real variety out there right now. I can't give you loads and loads of tips on the game assessments because I've only seen demonstrations of them. I know that a lot of students aren't overly keen on them because obviously it's a little harder to see what they're assessing when it's a game. It tends to be a mixture of situational judgment, verbal, numerical, logical reasoning, that kind of thing. Sometimes a presentation skills, sometimes it talks to you and you have to talk back. So really diverse range of new games and products out there at the moment, and it's a very new market. Still across a good bulk of China and still in the UK, in fact, you'll find more traditional online aptitude tests, which ours are verbal, numerical and logical reasoning and a situational judgment test, okay? So for the application form then, try and think about the corporate values and what makes you tick and what makes you want to work for that organisation. I know most websites tend to be the same, and it's quite hard to read between the lines. What are they good at? What are they much better at? But so therefore, given all of these corporate websites looking quite similar, I would take a step back and think, well, hang on a minute, what's important to me? And then visit the website. So for me, if I was going to work for a new company, I would want to know that they were a really good employer, that they look after their employees, because I have to recruit into that firm. So really important to me that they're a good employer. For you guys, it might be financial success or technology, or it might be corporate social responsibility, or that KPMG has a really good marathon team. Whatever matters to you is how to make that application form that little bit more personal, okay? And then, as I've said, with the aptitude tests, ours are quite straightforward, old traditional aptitude tests. Try not to panic. You can get some practice tests online, SHL, Cubics. We use Aon for ours. We also offer an example test, of course, before you take our actual test. So try not to panic and realise that aptitude is not something that you can learn. It's something inherent in the mental process, okay? It's not reflected in your personality. So don't feel badly if you don't pass aptitude tests. It doesn't mean that you're not clever. It just means that maybe that job isn't right for you right now. So then obviously after you've done your online aptitude tests, you'll go through into an assessment centre. This is the case with KPMG in the UK and the case with KPMG China. So obviously this slide is just showing you everything that you already know, I realise, in terms of what employers are looking for. But the reason I put this up is because you could start thinking now, couldn't you, about examples of these particular traits, skills and behaviours, and how you portray that in your daily life. So what you'll find is that most big graduate schemes have a big long list of what they would call competencies, skills and behaviours, values, whatever, however they would describe it. And throughout your whole selection process, the company will be assessing different values at different times. So obviously your online aptitude tests are going to be your decision making and your aptitude for solving problems. Your being a team player and showing leadership potential might come from some kind of group assessment, and confident communication and genuine interest would of course come from your interview as well. So that's kind of just want to explain to you how the process works. And throughout the selection process, the employer will be filling in gaps, filling in numbers, filling in assessments on you based around what they deem the most important skills and behaviours for their company. So you could start thinking, oh, okay, so if I'm asked about teamwork, I think I'll talk about that project. If I'm asked about being culturally aware, culturally adaptable, I'll talk about my time at Manchester and any difficulties that I had to overcome. So that's the kind of thing. And what you need to understand is, obviously, from an overseas intake, the kind of things that I would be looking for would be that global mindset, that cultural awareness, that confident communication that might stand you out versus your local counterparts who maybe haven't done as much travel as you. So they're the kinds of things you really want to be pushing throughout your selection process. And obviously the preparation for the interview, all very straightforward here for you to see. But the skill sets and behaviours, as I said, start to think of your examples, start to think of the questions that you want to know, because what you want to know is also really important to us, not just because we're thinking, oh, you know, you're part of the interview, we're going to see what they ask, but very much because you only get 1 or 2 interviews throughout your graduate selection process, which means you only get 1 or 2 opportunities to ask what's really important to you about a place where you could be spending a lot of your time. We spend a long time at work. So do use this as your forum to ask anything that's really important to you, because we have to sell ourselves to you too. Now, I've put Skype interviews on here because I've just said to you guys, of course, if you can't get back to China or Hong Kong for your assessments, you'll probably have some Skype interviews together with an assessment with me in London. Just remember, for Skype interviews, it's slightly different to build rapport than it is on a face-to-face interview. So on Skype, you need to be quite kind of show your emotions more, smile more, active listening more, and obviously bear in mind what's behind you, what you wear, all that kind of thing on Skype. Anything really fuzzy would come over strangely on the screen. Think about the fact that there's sometimes a delay when you're having a conversation on Skype, so you might have to make sure that the interviewer has finished asking the question before you answer. So just things to manage on a Skype interview. Just think it through before you go on to one. So our graduate programme then, we did an early batch of recruitment earlier on between April and June, okay, where you could have applied and then gone through the assessments back in China or Hong Kong in the summer. Obviously that's past now, but that does mean that we've filled up a lot of our graduate intake for this year across mainland China. That's why I did lead this off, as I said, as a Hong Kong event, because Hong Kong tends to be more of a rolling recruitment, whereas in mainland China, we're tied a little bit more to registration for certain exams. So we have to try and front load it a little bit more. So we'd have to have the China recruitment wrapped up by the end of this year at the absolute latest, okay? We're recruiting across all our 3 service lines, audit, tax and advisory. So you'd apply now and you would obviously hear back quite quickly. And you're obviously option 2 of this that you see on the screen, the autumn campus recruitment, okay? So now's the time to apply. Certainly for KPMG in the UK as well, I wouldn't wait any longer before you get those applications in, because all graduate recruitment does happen a long time in advance, I realise, but it's definitely as late as you want to apply now as we come into November. So let's just reiterate then, I've given you a lot of information there. You have your recruitment talk, which you guys have got now. Thanks for joining. Then you'll have your online assessment tests. Then you will have your interview and assessment centre. And then you would have all your onboarding training where we register you for your professional exams and where we, you know, kind of confirm your start date and your department, that kind of thing. So I think I've told you everything. What I'll do is on this last slide here, I'll just put on my email address, and obviously you've got all the different ways to apply there, all the different squares that you can click on and go straight to the application, okay? There's my email address. So if there's anything you want to ask me based on anything I've said or anything you think I haven't covered, then I'd love to hear from you. Each city in our China and Hong Kong offices has a graduate desk. And I often say, you know, first of all, treat me as your graduate desk, and then I'll make sure that you get in touch with the right people when it comes to your application. So lots of applications hopefully will be received after this. Lots of luck, and I hope to catch up with you all soon. Thanks for joining.